They laughed at the old man with a sack until he pulled out the papers that could ruin the whole bank. You ever watch someone walk into a place like they own it, and everybody else laughs because they know that person doesn't? That's exactly what happened on a regular Thursday morning at the Midland First Federal Bank branch in downtown Ashton, Georgia. It was just before noon. The lobby smelled like coffee and printer paper. Customers stood in line, some scrolling through their phones, others grumbling about fees and wait times. Behind the counter, a row of bank tellers clicked away at keyboards, trading small talk and sideways glances. Then the front door creaked open, and in shuffled a man who looked like he had just stepped off a dirt road in 1962. He had on faded denim overalls, the kind with buttons that looked like they belonged on a tractor. His boots were scuffed and cracked, and over one shoulder hung a rough burlap sack, stained in places that told you it had been through some things. That man was Silas Langford, and he was 78 years old. He didn't say much when he walked in, just nodded politely at a woman standing by the brochures, then made his way to the first open teller window like he had every right in the world to be there. The teller, a young guy named Derek, probably 25, fresh haircut, loud cologne, looked up, blinked, and forced a half smile. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" "I'd like to speak to whoever's in charge of this place." Derek paused, looked over at his coworker, then back at Silas. "In charge of the branch?" Silas nodded once. "That's right." Derek smiled again, this time with a hint of condescension. "Well, sir, the branch manager is in a meeting at the moment, but I can help you with whatever you need." Silas just looked at him for a long second, not mad, not upset, just patient, like someone who's been ignored enough times to know what comes next. "I appreciate that," he said, "but I believe this matter ought to be handled by someone with authority. See, I got business with this bank, real old business." That's when Derek noticed the sack, and like clockwork, the quiet laughter started behind the counter. A woman at the next window whispered something to her coworker. Another guy leaned forward to catch a better look, clearly entertained. One of the assistant managers, a man named Nate, stepped out from the back and glanced over. When he saw Silas, his eyes did a little roll before he turned back around. Nobody took him seriously, not with the overalls, not with the gray beard reaching down to his chest, and definitely not with the sack that looked like it was holding potatoes, or something worse. Silas stood there still, didn't argue, didn't shout, just waited. Derek, trying to stay polite, offered a friendly chuckle. "Sir, if this is about a loan or some paperwork from the past, I can check." "It's not about a loan," Silas cut in, slow but firm. "It's about ownership." Derek's smile faded. "Ownership?" Silas gave a small nod and tapped the sack gently. "This bank." The air changed. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. Then someone laughed loud enough to cut through the silence. "You own the bank?" a voice said from the back. "Come on, man." Derek cleared his throat, suddenly aware this might be turning into something more than just a joke. He looked at Silas, trying to read him. "You saying you have some kind of claim to this branch?" Silas took a deep breath, then said, almost like he was tired of repeating the same thing over and over, "I'm saying my granddaddy helped build this bank with money they never put his name on, and I'm here to correct that." But before Derek could figure out what to do next, the branch manager's door finally opened, and the temperature in the room was about to shift again. The branch manager's name was Marcus Trent, mid-40s, tall, pressed Navy suit, and always in a hurry. He didn't like surprises, didn't like walk-ins, and especially didn't like anything that threw off his carefully timed day. He stepped out of his office with a tablet in hand, eyes scanning the lobby. "Derek, that client from Pine Grove just canceled. We'll reschedule next week. You got everything under control out here? Derek glanced at Silas, then back at Marcus. Um, yeah, but Mr. Langford here says he needs to speak with someone in charge. Says it's important. Marcus sighed. He was already halfway back to his office. Is it a fraud claim? Missing account? Power of attorney issue? Silas spoke before Derek could. I'm claiming what was promised to my family nearly 90 years ago. Ain't fraud, ain't missing. Marcus turned around slowly, blinking like he wasn't sure he heard that right. You're claiming what exactly? The bank, Silas said, calm, steady. That was the moment people stopped pretending not to listen. A woman near the ATM looked up from her purse. A couple filling out a deposit slip froze mid-sentence, and behind the counter, the smirks got wider. Marcus gave a dry laugh, not unkind, just tired. Sir, this is a federally regulated financial institution. We don't exactly hand out ownership stakes. I ain't asking for handouts, Silas said, lifting the sack and patting it. What I got in here is worth more than anything in them drawers behind you. Derek leaned closer to Marcus, lowering his voice. He says his grandfather helped start the bank. Says he's got documents, original stuff, deeds, letters, stock certificates. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Stock certificates from the 1930s? Derek nodded, as if that somehow made it more believable. Marcus exhaled slowly, then gave a tight-lipped smile. Sir, we don't really have time for... You got time, Silas said. It wasn't a demand. It was a fact. For a second, Marcus just stared at him. Something about the way Silas said it, so quiet but so absolute, made the noise of the lobby fade into background static. Marcus scratched the side of his face and finally said, All right, let's step into my office for a minute. He turned and led the way. Silas followed without saying another word, sack still slung over his shoulder. As the door clicked shut behind them, Derek and a few other staff exchanged looks like they were watching the beginning of a sitcom episode gone wrong. $5 says he's got Confederate money in that bag, someone whispered. Nah, it's probably just newspaper clippings and a bunch of nothing, another added. But back in the office, things were getting real quiet, real fast. Silas sat down slowly across from Marcus's glass desk. Didn't slump, didn't complain. Just placed the sack in his lap and opened it carefully, like it was holding something alive. Inside were folders wrapped in cloth, thick envelopes sealed in wax, and one leather-bound ledger that looked older than the city itself. Marcus leaned forward, watching him like a TSA agent screening an oversized suitcase. What exactly am I looking at here, Mr. Langford? Silas pulled out a yellowed sheet of paper. The top read, Midland Savings and Loan. March 3rd, 1932, in bold script. Start here, he said. Marcus took the document with both hands. The paper felt brittle, like it might turn to dust if he breathed too hard. His eyes scanned the page. Then the signature at the bottom. Preston T. Langford, he read out loud. That's my grandfather, Silas said. Put up land and capital when this place was just a room above a grocery store. Never got the shares promised to him when they incorporated. Marcus blinked, read the signature again. His fingers froze over the embossed seal. Silas reached into the sack again. Here's the ledger with the names of the original contributors. One copy stayed with the Avery family. Other copy stayed with us. This one. He laid the book down like a brick on the desk. Marcus didn't say anything. Just sat back in his chair, glancing between the ledger and the document. I got more, Silas said. Letters, receipts, contracts with ink that ain't faded yet. Marcus didn't move. Not yet. Because for the first time all morning, he wasn't sure if the old man sitting in front of him was crazy or the only one telling the truth. Marcus finally broke the silence. All right, let me get someone from compliance in here. Silas gave a single nod, folded his hands, and waited. Marcus stepped out into the hallway and called over to one of the cubicles. Shannon, can you come to my office? Bring your laptop. We might need to pull some archival filings. Shannon Green was sharp, late 30s, glasses always halfway down her nose, and the type who could smell a lie in 12 seconds flat. If anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was her. She walked in with that half-curious, half-annoyed look employees get when someone interrupts lunch. This about the guy with the sack? She said quietly. Marcus gave a tight nod. Just take a look at what he brought. She opened the ledger first. Her fingers moved fast, scanning handwritten names, dates, even property references. Silas watched her closely but said nothing. After a minute, her eyebrows lifted just a bit. This is detailed, she murmured. She flipped a few pages. And consistent. This doesn't look fake. She picked up one of the letters and held it to the light. Watermark's legit. That's 1930s cotton paper. She paused. Where did you get all this? My grandfather kept it. My daddy protected it. I kept it safe. Shannon glanced at Marcus. You know the name Preston T. Langford? Marcus shrugged. Number should I? Shannon tapped on her laptop, pulling up archived shareholder files. Maybe. She scrolled for a while. Silas sat silently, his hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for church to start. Then she stopped. Hold on, she said. There's a Langford listed in one of the original founding documents for Midland Savings, but he was marked as a contributor, not a shareholder, no voting rights, no equity. She clicked again. And then, nothing. His name disappears after 1935. Silas spoke without looking up. They erased him, just like they erased half the people who helped build this place. Shannon looked over. You're saying your grandfather never got what he was promised? I ain't saying it, Silas replied. I'm showing it. Shannon looked back at the ledger, then at the letter, then at Silas. This could take a while to verify, Mr. Langford. I've waited 80 years, he said simply. I reckon I can wait a little longer. Marcus stood still, staring at the evidence on his desk. For the first time since Silas walked through that door, he wasn't thinking about how long his next meeting was. He was thinking about lawsuits, legacy, reputation, and about how this old man with a sack might just be the only person in the building telling the truth. Within 2 hours, Shannon had looped in the regional compliance officer, then a legal advisor, then someone from corporate who asked for high-resolution scans of every document. The bank lobby, which once chuckled at the man in overalls, now buzzed with quiet urgency. Someone brought Silas a cup of coffee. Another offered him a seat in a side office, but he refused to sit anywhere else. He waited in Marcus's office, calm, silent, steady. By the next morning, the phones at Midland First Federal Bank were ringing nonstop. A legal inquiry had been launched. The documents Silas carried were declared authentic in origin and significant in relevance. The story hit the Ashton Tribune by noon, and by sundown the headline read, Elderly Man Claims Bank Ownership with Forgotten Evidence from 1932. Local news vans parked outside the bank. Reporters snapped photos through the windows. And for once, nobody laughed at Silas Langford. A week later, in a formal meeting room on the 15th floor of the bank's corporate building, Silas sat across from Edward McKinley, the CEO of the Midland Banking Network. The room smelled of mahogany and importance. On the table lay a contract drawn up by lawyers who had spent the last 6 days combing through every document Silas had brought. Edward leaned forward. Mr. Langford, on behalf of Midland First Federal, I want to say that we regret the oversight, whether deliberate or incidental. that occurred nearly a century ago. Based on our findings, your grandfather was indeed an early contributor whose financial backing played a key role in the bank's founding. Silas didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just waited. Edward continued, accordingly, our board has voted unanimously to issue a retroactive share package, adjusted for historical value and interest. You and your family will be recognized as founding stakeholders. There will also be a public acknowledgement ceremony, should you agree. Silas looked at the contract. He didn't care about the money, not really. He didn't come for a check. He came for truth, for legacy, for a name that had been wiped from history, finally written back in. He nodded. That'll do. That weekend, they held the ceremony on the front steps of the bank, the same spot where Silas's grandfather once stood in a photo with men who never kept their promises. The mayor gave a speech, a plaque was unveiled, and reporters captured the moment when a man in overalls and scuffed boots stood next to a polished CEO, both holding the same document. But the most powerful part was when Marcus Trent, the same branch manager who once rolled his eyes, stepped up to the podium and said, sometimes we forget that history is written by those with the pen. Mr. Langford reminded us that sometimes the truth is held by the one with the sack. Silas didn't say much that day, just tipped his cap to the crowd, then walked home. And in a quiet house on the edge of Ashton, where old trees swayed and the porch creaked like it was whispering secrets, Silas Langford finally placed that burlap sack on a shelf, not because he needed it anymore, but because now the world knew what was inside it. If this story moved you like the video, share it widely with your friends to spread this meaningful message. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue joining us in the next deep and touching stories. Thank you for following along, and we'll meet again in the next stories.